You're very welcome to the Irish Political Roundup's Agri Food segment with me, Roisin the Cleric.
And me, Paul Brophy.
Joining us for this panel are two of our regular panel guests, Patrick Murphy, CEO of the Irish South and West Fishing Producers Organisation and with the Seafood Alliance. Patrick O'Neill, who's a former Fine Gael County Councillor and a beef farmer here in Bennettsbridge in Kilkenny. And also joining us is Cynthia Mhurchú, the Fianna Fáil's MEP for Ireland South. You're all very, very welcome to the Irish Political Roundup. On this segment, we will be discussing the Irish fisheries and the Mercosur trade deal. On the fisheries side, we will be discussing heritage, culture, customs, food security and food supply within the fishing industry here in Ireland. The rights to fish on our own waters and harvest what is ours proven by Brexit. We'll be talking about treaties, laws, the rights of any European citizens. We'll be talking about the guaranteed voting takes away any democracy for smaller countries like Ireland and the fishing off the fisheries industry. We will be discussing Irish neutrality as, according to Patrick Murphy, we won't be allowed to fish because of the submarines and the cables. And then we'll be discussing another hot topic here in Ireland in the agri-food sector, the Mercosur trade deal, which will allow cheap, unregulated Brazilian beef into Irish supermarket shelves. Irish beef we'll also be talking about Irish beef, the food safety of our beef. It will also cause, to some people have said, a health safety concerns relating to the carcinogenics, hormones injected into Brazilian cows. You're very, very welcome, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening, Roisin. Good evening, Paul and Cynthia and Patrick.
I feel ashamed. I don't speak Irish, and I grew up in Derry and the Middle East and South and Africa. And in Derry, we didn't speak Irish. We weren't taught in school. So my sincere apologies.
You can always start, Roisin. You've got a fine Gaelic name, Roisin Chleirigh.
Thank you. No, I forget what that charm of yours, Cynthia, just took me by surprise.
Well, I'm kind of exhausted before you get going there because it sounds like we need longer than an hour to discuss all of those topics, especially when you've got Patrick Murphy on the panel. I've seen him in action.
We have him warned. He has to stay on topic.
That's for sure. That's for sure.
Well, we're going to kick off straight into the fishing and then we'll go into the beef and the Mercosur. So apologies for that, Patrick, but I know you have an awful lot to say too about food safety within the fisheries industry. Cynthia, we also know that you are meeting our very own Patrick Murphy tomorrow in Brussels.
Yes, that's right. Look, the fishers were dealt a raw blow, a mean blow at the council meeting before Christmas. Patrick can deal with it in more detail, but to be quite honest, it's not overly dramatic to say it was the death knell that was drawn down on top of the fishers. Unfortunately, there was a ganging up of a number of strong European countries against Ireland's position with regards to them seeking retention and continuation of the Hague preference, which is really important to maintain any semblance of the fishing industry in Ireland. And unfortunately, I think the only country that supported Ireland, Patrick will bear this out, was Spain. But the other countries ganged up, and I don't say that lightly. It was a ganging up, even though our very able minister, Timmy Dooley, did an awful lot of pre-work prior to the meeting, right across the board, trying to build collaborations over a lengthy period. And unfortunately, it didn't come to pass. So now we're in an interregnum period whereby for the year of 2026, as I see it, and again, Patrick can correct me, the fishing industry is in dire straits. That may be revisited and revised in 2027, but there's a whole 12 months between this and then. And compensation is the main topic of conversation, I believe, tomorrow, Patrick. But I mean, compensation, it's like the farmers. And I'm sure Patrick O'Neill will bear this out. The farmers don't want compensation. They want to be able to farm. The fishers don't want compensation. They want to be able to fish. They want to be able to make a living. So I'm standing with the fishers. I'm also standing with the farmers. But look, over to Patrick to give you a full chapter and verse on the dire straits of fishers in Ireland.
Patrick, if we start off with the heritage and the culture and customs of Irish fisheries.
Yeah, well, look, this is going on for hundreds of years. We really didn't get our sovereignty back until we got free of the UK, and we have still areas around the coastline that are owned by actual English people or their descendants. Would you believe it? Our heritage, our numbers are dwindling fast. We have a very, very low entry rate into the industry. And the customs that we once seen thriving around our coastal communities is erased. It's gone. In Baltimore, where I started fishing, there was over 30 boats over 50 feet. There's 2 or 3 left now. In Skull, there was a huge fleet there. There was a factory there employing 200 people, all gone. In Castletown Bay after Brexit, and the detriment of that, we went from 60 large boats down to around 45 just in our own harbour alone. So, it's really calling into question whether we'll have a viable fishing industry in the very near future. And in fairness to Cynthia, who's raising this, we'd love to see her getting onto the PESH committee in the Commission and in the Parliament to raise a stronger voice there. So we'll be pushing Cynthia on that and educating her as much as she needs to be educated. Even in her short time talking to us, you can see how fast she picks it up. And just to let you know that Cynthia is coming down to us in Castletown Bay in February, I think. Cynthia might give us some details on that. But look, I'll give you a simple story to explain this. We have boats that are earned and secured and paid for, not in one lifetime, but maybe 2 or 3. And when you have the boat paid for, then it's a matter of you just have to keep putting money in to keep it up to code. And nobody knows better than fishermen how a corrosive substance salt water is. It rusts everything, so you're constantly spending money on boats. But even so, if you've managed to buy a boat that's not cheap, it's a huge amount of outlay of money. It's like any factory. It's a working factory, and you're talking millions. And can you imagine there was 5 young skippers, sons of boat owners, in a local harbour called Union Hall, and they were having a conversation, and 3 of them were thinking of telling their parents that they were going to leave, go back to college. They saw no future in the industry, even though the families had the boats not only bought but paid for. So all they had to do was maintain them and keep them going and make them in a rich resource that we have around our island. But the problem is we get such a small share of fish in our own waters. One example of that is, as Cynthia said, because we didn't get the Hague preferences, in an area called 7F&G, it's between England and Ireland in the Celtic Sea, a very, very valuable fish, sole, is caught there, and the quota is around 600 tons. Belgium, with a coastline of 64 kilometres long, has 450 tons of that to catch. I don't know the coastline of Ireland, but I do know from maybe Wexford up to Waterford, wouldn't be far off that length of coastline as in Brussels. We get 28 ton in our waters. And Belgium does not connect to that sea. The English Channel is in between it. So it doesn't even border this area of water. And that's the amount of share that they've got historically. And under the Hague preferences, we probably would have got maybe 100 ton of that. Of course, it would have to come off the Belgians because we can't overfish, despite the accusations that are made from us. All of it combined, we can never overfish it. We're just not allowed in any of the species, all of us. So that's what we're talking about.
Patrick is really, really good on the tonnage and explaining it as he has. But if we want to take even a baby simpler percentage or a stat, because sometimes, when people are looking at these programs, they kind of think, oh, just give me one figure. I want to give one figure, and that is only 15% of fish that's caught in Irish waters are caught by Irish boats, by Irish owned vessels. 15%. Now, okay. I understand that most right-minded thinking people understand that Irish waters should primarily be for Irish fishers, albeit we are in the European Union and we do want to share out and benefit from quotas with our brothers and sisters who are involved in the European Union and so forth. But with that sharing has to come a fair system, a fair access system, and equitable quotas. So it's not just about economics, because you mentioned heritage there, Roisin, and we kicked off talking about Gaeilge. So I've been visiting fishing communities all my life, predominantly as a broadcaster, I suppose I should say, for the first chunk of my life, the first 10 years, because Lowry and Dini Gaeilge, sna pobl seo, these communities, they speak Irish, they fish trí Gaeilge, they also do a trí Verlan, that's fine. But I'm just saying it's a rich heritage for the language and for the traditions, not just to do with fishing, but to do with our language and our song and our poetry and all of that. And this was a point that I made to Commissioner Cadiz, who is the Commissioner for Fisheries, last year when Fianna Fáil got a group meeting with him and so forth. But that has to be protected, and it's not being protected, and things have got to be put right. So I'm glad that Patrick and his colleagues are coming out tomorrow. I've already been liaising strongly with the Renew Europe, that's my group in Europe, the advisor there, Isaac, and he's going to join us hopefully tomorrow for the meeting. And I've already requested a meeting. I did over Christmas. I wrote immediately after the disastrous council meeting, wrote immediately to Commissioner Cadiz. And I said, look, I've got to meet you the first available opportunity. And it sounds like it'll be next week in Strasbourg. And again, I will pursue him and I'll make the point. I hear what Patrick is saying. Get onto the PESH committee. It was extremely disappointing, even for me to realise that the delegation of all the MEPs had failed to put somebody full-time on the PESH committee at the start of the mandate when we all got elected in July 24. That's because there's only 15 of us and we couldn't spread ourselves across all the committees. But on reflection, I am sorry that happened, and we do have to make amends in that regard. The Fianna Fáil MEPs have been rotating their presence on the PESH committee, but I hear what Patrick's saying. We just need a Miss or a Mr. PESH committee MEP from Ireland on it, talking all the time.
And I'm going to jump in there now to back up exactly what Cynthia said. So I'm going to put it in figures like Cynthia said. So what I said about the sole, so instead of 15%, we have 5% of the sole. We have 7% of the likes of the hake quota in our own waters. So it's even worse across some of the species. Some we have more than others, but the vast majority of the whitefish stocks, we have less. The two main stocks that we depended on the most was mackerel and prawns. And during Brexit, they were the two stocks, would you believe it, that we gave the most away to the UK in the deal. And then following that, the coastal states such as Norway, the UK themselves, and Iceland and the Faroes, they decided to take more than the scientific advice. And as a result, they've crashed the stock, so much so that it's gone down 70% in 1 year. So these blows that are happening to the Irish fishing industry cannot be accustomed to. And I'll explain why. Because when the common fishery policy set up, we had plenty fish in our own waters. We had boats that didn't have to travel too far away from the shoreline because of the abundance of fish. And that's where the Hague preferences came into it, because they guaranteed that if the fish stocks went down low, we'd be protected.
Absolutely.
And they took that protection away from us. So we're still allowing those boats to come in and catch millions and millions and millions of euros worth of fish in their own waters while our boats go out of business. And that's unfair. It's unjust. I'd call it colonialism. And that's why we need the likes of Cynthia to raise this in the Parliament to get fairness for the people of Ireland, because it's enshrined in law. It's under relative stability. It's under the common fishery policy. It's not just about protecting the stocks. This is where I'm coming with heritage and customs. It's also meant to protect the coastal communities and the people that are most dependent on this resource.
And Patrick, sorry, Roisin, back before Christmas, the Hague preferences were blocked. Timmy Dooley, the Minister for Marine, he wanted to invoke that, but he was blocked. Why was he not allowed to carry through with that?
Well, you see, because at the start, when this was agreed in The Hague, we trusted our European colleagues when we were negotiating this, so we didn't enshrine it in law. And look, there's nobody better than Cynthia to address that as a barrister. We didn't dot the I's and dot the I's, yes, and cross the T's, and we didn't put it into legislation. So we left the door open, and the European Court of Justice ruled when it was challenged, the actual invoking of The Hague's, that it was a political competency and that it went back to the member states themselves and the Council of Ministers. And just to explain that, because we touched it on earlier on, quantitative voting means a majority vote. And if you have the majority, then you're not going to change things. So it's like asking turkeys to vote for Christmas. Do you know, it's as simple as that. You're asking countries to give up the fish that they have to give it back to Ireland. Now, touching again on Brexit, that's exactly what happened with the UK. When they left the European Union and the common fishery policy, they regained sovereignty over their waters and the fish within them. So the other countries had to trade once again and do a bargain with them to allow them to continue to fish for species inside there and work out how much you could have. We gave 39 million worth of fish in UK waters to allow to fish. But not only did we do that, we also allowed them to fish in our waters. And in the Porcupine, they have around 800 ton of nephrops to catch. And that 800 ton of fish is worth around 20,000 a ton. So you're talking millions of euros, as well as the other fish we gave, they can catch in our waters in reciprocal access. So we got a very bad deal, and we lost 25% of our fleet and 25% of our fish. So that proves that the common fishery policy is not being fair, because they set all the rules aside when Brexit happened, gave them back their fish, and actually punished us for it. So they took fish off us and gave it to the UK. The other countries that were catching fish in our waters also gave that fish to the UK. So we were victims over and over again. And as a result, we are in the position now that we've gone from thousands of boats down to 140. That is the reality. And in the last 20 years, we went from 400 Irish registered boats down to 140. And if that continues, sure, we're an endangered species.
Yeah, and can I just say, and I'm sorry, maybe Patrick O'Neill wants to comment on this as well, but I've been going to West Cork all my life on holidays, because I just happened to be there, I don't know, a million years ago, and I fell in love with Baltimore, and it brings almost tears to my eyes when Patrick mentions about Baltimore and how he started out fishing there, because I didn't know him as a fisherman back then, but I did recognise, I hardly recognise the harbour now, I should say, from the harbour that I remember all those decades ago. And I do know Union Hall as well. It's a place that I frequented very often. And I have seen the busyness and the industry and the families and the commercial activity, whether it's the mechanics or the net repairers or the trucks loading up and heading off and driving off. I haven't spent much time in Killybegs. I mean, obviously it's a huge operation there. I didn't spend a huge amount of time where Patrick is based in Castletown Bear, but I do know it. But I'm just talking about those two little areas. But these are real families, and I do think it is tragic. It's almost unbelievable, the story that Patrick told about fishermen's sons or daughters, whoever, it doesn't really matter whether sons or daughters, being handed a boat, paid for, over a couple of generations, and being responding and saying, well, look, I actually think it's probably better for me to go back to college. Now, it's a little bit reminiscent of farming as well, because I do know that there are sons and daughters of farmers who are being offered the handover of the family farm, and they're kind of saying, look, the living is not in it for me, let alone for me and for you, if you're going to have a right of residence or a right of residence and sustenance on the title, which is the normal way for farming families. You normally retire off the older farmer and the wife, or the older farmer and the husband, whoever was farming, and they do have rights that have to be funded and paid for out of the family farm, which is taken on. But frequently now there aren't two family incomes on the farm anymore. I mean, maybe Patrick O'Neill would have more to say about that.
You're on mute there, Patrick.
I won't comment on the fisheries anyway, because it isn't my area of expertise, and I did very little fishing in my youth, and I was a very bad fisherman. Didn't catch a whole lot, bar cold. But it is scary to see what's going on. Even like whatever our troubles in the agriculture industry, the fishing industry is another level of of problems for the individuals and families involved in the fishing industry across Ireland. And I've been educated on it over the last year to 2 years that we've been on panels and discussing things here, pretty with Patrick there. And it's obviously I wouldn't hear a lot about where I'm based, but and again, I suppose there's such a small group of people that have been keeping that industry going, and I suppose it's easily gets forgotten about. And again, like farmers, they're hardworking people who just get their head down and go out and do their day's work and come home and don't have a whole lot of time for the politics of everything because they're constantly working. So, and they need people like Patrick Murphy and others to represent them as best as possible across Europe in particular, as that's basically where everything is governed from a water perspective in reality nowadays. And I suppose farming has another part to play in that. And a couple of things Cynthia has touched on there. Like farming it's at a funny stage, you could say. Like it's obviously had a boom in the dairy industry for a period of time, and there's a bit of doom and gloom around that at the minute, and things haven't it's hit a bit of a wall and it's kind of trending downwards, where obviously in the last 12 months beef has been on an upward trend. And whereas so many people that have turned their back on beef from a farming perspective are reconsidering it as a potential option if things can hold. Obviously, there's been a lot of news that we'll get into, I'm sure, as we go on here, that may cause some potential issues for that down the tracks. But it's we've been farming is very much heavily reliant on European money, and how the common agricultural policy as it was to help grow the European market, to help produce food at a price that is affordable to most individuals across the continent. Had its purpose, but it's kind of turned now into it's very like, I was just looking at it the other day, like our payments from Europe, I suppose, on our farm have almost halved in the last 10 to 15 years. And you're doing the same work, you're producing you're even more efficient, which is great, but they've been chipping away at the agricultural budget for a long time, and pushing it maybe towards more environmental stuff, which all has a part to play, but it all ends up being little small side schemes that are all just tick the box exercises that are not really going to help us achieve what we need to achieve. Putting more work on farmers, putting more costs on them, and cutting, I suppose, the direct payments that they've been getting. So, Europe has lots to answer for when it comes to how they've handled agriculture. I know
absolutely,
there's
absolutely, but I just want to say very succinctly: no farmers, no food. I mean, they're talking until the cows come home here, morning, noon and night, since I got elected, about defence. And rightly so. Okay, we've got an outrageous war, an illegal war being conducted. Putin and Ukraine, Russia and Ukraine. We've got another war, a trade war and so forth. But the fact of the matter is, we all need to eat 3 times a day, or in my case, 6 times a day. And if we don't have farmers producing the food for that, well, then we won't be able to feed the armies that we're supposed to be investing in, and rightly so, across Europe, in our own way, because obviously we come from different, I suppose, different political situations, neutrality in our case, and some other countries in Europe, and we might be touching on that. But that's all I want to say. No farmers, no food. It's a no-brainer for me, as far as I'm concerned. And yes, you have been weaned, I suppose, and overweaned in relation to payments. But you had to be, because the budget in farming was reduced. And as you said, the environmental matters were meshed into it, Patrick. And you're expected still to pay for the same amount of things. And the cost of living increases, all the inputs that have increased for farming over the last 10 years. To land us in a position whereby the average farm income in Ireland is approximately something like 30,000. Right? I mean, there is no way a farmer and her family can survive on that, with the amount of the costs involved in it. And, I'm sick of people saying, oh God, the price of beef, and they've done so well. And, farming is like that. It's like the waves that Patrick and his people have to fish on. It's literally up and down. What you try and do is you try and make money in the good times, because by God, you'll need it for the lean times.
Cynthia, can I ask you a question? Can I ask a question of Cynthia, please? Cynthia, what in economics and in supply and demand, will the price of food go up if we lose our farmers or go down?
I reckon the price is only going to go up. I really do. And I'll tell you what's also going to go up. I do think our health in general and the costs of health will go up. Why? Because we won't be eating fresh food and freshly and sustainably produced food that is not only good for the body but good for the environment. And case in point in that is the Mercosur beef, which I believe is beyond substandard. I don't want to be, I suppose, creating overly dramatic scenarios, but we have had beef from the Mercosur countries withdrawn for a specific reason. It's called human health. And therefore, it could be dangerous. It could reduce our resistance to certain drugs because of the fact that the animals out there are being injected with antibiotics and other growth hormones that were banned in Europe not a couple of years ago, but decades ago. So the production in the Mercosur countries is completely substandard when you look at the standards that Patrick O'Neill has to comply with, I should say.
Just to come back in on all this, so like it's, and I've touched on this many times on this on these debates, is that we're producing food to the highest possible standards here, and farmers are similar to fishermen in a way. If you look back on the Dáil 20, 30 years ago, I'd say there was at least 30 farmers within the Dáil, in MEPs, etc. There was loads of farmers involved in politics. And farmers, I suppose, are, like fishermen, are more affected in policy than any other way of life in reality, because so much of our laws come from Europe, and how we deal and how we work on a daily basis come from Europe. Because farming has changed, and there's less labor on farms nowadays, as kids, they can't afford to stay at home on a farm because the money is not there to pay them. So there's less. So each farmer now is doing more on their farm. They don't have as much time maybe to get involved in political life, to rep. The farm organizations don't have. Farmers don't have the time that they maybe used to have because the labor isn't there in their farm to get involved in politics, to take a step in as a councillor or a TD or even an MEP at some stage. So farmers have been underrepresented at political level, I find, for the last 20 or so years, and I think that has had a detrimental effect on the policy that's come from Ireland and Europe. But when it comes to Mercosur, right, try and break it down very, very. As you all know, I'm very centrist in my views, and as a whole, we're Europeans, and the Mercosur trade deal as a whole is probably a good deal for a lot of Europe and everything that comes along with it.
Absolutely.
I don't have a huge issue with the 1.5% of 99,000 tons of Brazilian beef as a product. Like, obviously there's issues with the hormones and how they treat their animals and all that the hypocrisy of it is what annoys me on that point, where the standards that we go through to produce our food is second to none. You will not see it anywhere else in the world. We are being made jump through all sorts of environmental hoops here in Ireland from a farming perspective to produce our food, but we're willing to take in this beef from countries that are, they are causing issues to the Amazon rainforest. They are, pumping them with certain hormones. Not all farmers, I'm sure, in Brazil and other areas are doing this, but it is happening, and we've seen proof of it. I don't have a huge issue with the, in a trade deal importing that tonnage of beef. I don't envisage it having a serious detrimental effect on beef price in Europe. There is safeguards being put in place that I do think will help if something did distort the market. But it's the hypocrisy of what we've had to deal with for nigh on 20, 30 years of what, been chipping away at us from an environmental perspective in particular. And we're all environmentalists. I have no issue with doing what I have to do on my farm to help the environment. But it's like being talked down to the whole time as if farmers are this big, bad like the same amount of cows are in the world as there were thousands of years ago. Like, they're not producing less manure. They're not producing less this. Like, that's not changed. That hasn't changed. The cow numbers are the same. So, farmers are there now, and we're close to being pushed over the edge as being where there's going to be no return. Like, small farmers are going to disappear. The nitrate derogation was part of that. Again, not something that affects me personally, but, that generally helps small dairy farmers to keep going and survive. And, what's special about Ireland is we still have our small family farm set up, and you won't find that in a lot of European countries anymore. No. Even in the UK, there are large farms. Like, Ireland is very unique in that way. So we're very close to push. Europe as a whole is very close to making that disappear if we don't, sit back and think about how we're doing things and what we're asking our farmers to do. Our farmers will produce the best food no matter what they do. They're proud. This is what they want to do. I think the Mercosur thing, more so than anything, I think it's the frustration of the hypocrisy of the whole thing has annoyed farmers more than anything.
Yes, but Patrick, I agree with you on the hypocrisy. I don't know whether I agree with you on the fact that the 99,000 tonnes, you're more of an expert because you're at the coalface. You're saying it won't make that amount of a difference, or the difference that perhaps is going to be as detrimental as we think. But I believe in standards. And if Europe is laying down standards for the farmers of Europe, whether you're a French farmer, whether you're an Irish farmer, and if there are very high standards to be met by all of us farming in Europe, it's completely unfair then. It's a completely unlevel playing pitch to accept in this beef. So I'm also on, when we know, when it's proven, as you said, that it is substandard. And it's the not knowing. Yes, it is a small amount. And Commissioner Hansen said the exact same thing to me before Christmas when I cornered him nicely professionally about this. And he said, well, look, it's a small amount and we're satisfied that the producers that would provide that small amount, the 99,000 tonnes, that they will comply with the standards. But you see, the standards are only as good as the examining stations along the way. And that's, that's made up of persons who are doing their job to a sufficient standard. And of course, we know that certain persons or certain systems failed because they failed a couple of times because the beef has been recalled. Those beef products have been recalled. So I'm unhappy with it because I think it's the start of a slippery slope. And it really undermines the trust and confidence that citizens that I represent, because I want to be true to what they gave me a mandate to ensure that the European standards were upheld. So I sit on another committee. I'm not on the Agri Committee. Obviously, I keep a strong watching brief, but I am on a committee called IMCO, Internal Market Consumer Protection, also businesses being protected. And on that committee, we're constantly talking about the likes of Shein or the likes of substandard products coming from China, which could explode in a child's face and scar them, or which could set alight the nightdress of an old age pensioner and burn her, God forbid, or burn somebody to death. So we're constantly hounding that side of the business. But then when it comes to the Mercosur beef, we kind of ignore those standards. Now, I understand the geopolitical situation. We need Mercosur big time because we're under huge pressure with tariffs in America. Of course, we need new markets. And of course, this was in being for 25 years or over 20 years. And we had to resuscitate it very, very quickly when we saw what President Trump was doing and how we're being treated. But the beef and the Mercosur beef should have been severed off from the get-go. The arguments were still there at the time. Unfortunately, it's now too late unless the Parliament votes no, and there's got to be a massive rethink. There's also another aspect, folks, and that is that next week, parliamentarians in Strasbourg, like myself, we're going to be voting on whether we support or not to refer the Mercosur deal as a whole to the European Court of Justice. If that happens, then there will be a freezing of the implementation of the agreement. And we'll see, will that buy us a little bit more time to try and do more lobbying? Because we're constantly, those of us who are against Mercosur, the Irish MEPs, we're constantly lobbying. We're falling over each other, actually talking to the same people outside of our groups even, to try and get a no vote. At the moment, I have to say, it looks like it'll all depend on who turns up to vote on the day. MEPs, we don't know. At the moment, the mood music for me is that MEPs, some of them will not vote on country lines. So the big block of countries that voted for Mercosur at the meeting last Friday, or Friday week, I'm losing track of days, but I think it was last Friday, their MEPs may not follow along country lines. May not. And the S&D group, which is a large bloc in the European Parliament, EPP is the biggest, and then we have S&D. A number of S&D colleagues that I've spoken to are saying there's a turning towards a no vote. Will that be enough? I don't know. It depends on who turns up. But we won't have 720 MEPs voting in the chamber, that's for sure, because we never get that. 200 MEPs voted against Mercosur in a previous vote in the run-up. So that's a sizable amount to build off. But I don't want to be injecting false hope into this conversation. But I do just want to differentiate with Patrick O'Neill there. And I think you're very fair-minded about it. I normally would be very pro trade agreements, obviously being on that IMCO committee and realising our economy in Ireland as a small, open, free trade. Well, of course, we depend on free trade, and more so now than ever. But in this instance, there's too much at stake, and we haven't even mentioned the environmental situation. And who knows what government will come into being in those Mercosur countries and who will just disregard all the so-called environmental conditions that are supposed to be so in line with Europe. They've got to cut down a lot of trees in order to let cows graze, or in order to house the cows to some degree.
And Cynthia, just there last Saturday, there was an absolutely massive protest in Athlone. It was organised by Independent Ireland. Both myself and Roisin were there. Nearly 30,000 people turned up in Athlone. There was like tractors backed up for 7 kilometres. You had farmers, yes, had farmers coming from all across the country, and there's people, who wouldn't be from a farming background, and they were coming because they're concerned about the health implications of the whole Mercosur agreement. And there's another part in this Mercosur agreement that has probably kind of gone a little bit unnoticed. It's around poultry and grain.
Yeah.
Poultry farmers will potentially be in for even a bigger hit than beef farmers when nearly 1.5 million tons of chicken fillets could come into the country, which could wipe out the whole poultry sector in Ireland as well.
Paul. Yeah, and grain, as you say. Now, there's other major benefits as well for farmers, which we won't go into. But can we just pause here? The reason why so many people came out, and Patrick O'Neill has touched on it about rural Ireland, and he said, we're sick of being talked down to. And I heard that during the election campaign in 2024 for the 3 months that I campaigned, and it really resonated with me because when I drilled down and when I listened to farmers and when I looked at what was going on with their red tape and the talking down, it is a reality. And very much talked down in relation to the last top-heavy, environmentally driven mandate of the MEPs and of the Parliament. I mean, literally, new policies, new laws, new directives were shoveled down the throats of farmers. And that's all fine. Of course, they want to look after their lands. It's their livelihood. It's their investment. It's like having their pension plan there. But of course, they couldn't be expected to implement all of these environmentally friendly directives if they weren't getting extra money for it. And the next thing they were told, well, you know what? You won't get extra money. We'll just lump it in with your usual cap payments. So effectively a reduction. And the same talking down has commenced, Patrick. I don't know how you feel about the opening salvo of the cap budget, which is like 20% less at the start of, this mandate for farmers. Again, it's another blow. So I think rural people, and there is, thanks be to God, the rural-urban divide is alive and well, but rural communities realise that farmers spend their money in the economy. They also contribute to the economy in social and community events, whether it's fundraising, whether it's the local badminton club, whether it's the local rugby club or the GAA club, or whether they'll pull their neighbour out through their front gate because they've got the tractor when it's icy and snowy. I mean, the farmers are the first to be out there helping out and in real ways, in meaningful ways. And people that are not involved in farming in Carlow town, and remember, I'm from a town, but I'm on the edge of town and I'm up against Teagasc, and my mother was from a farm. But people who are townies in Carlow, even they are out supporting the farmers as well because they know about the return from the farming community to the local community. And I do not want to see, whether it's fishers down in Baltimore or in Castletownbere, I don't want to see the carving out of all these little SMEs, and we'll call them little because they normally are little. It is hand to mouth, but you make enough to put a child or two through college, and by doing that, you contribute to the local shop or the local joinery or the local, veterinary clinic or whatever it is, all those local businesses. But you create a vibrant ecosystem in a part of Ireland, rural Ireland, that people want to live in, and that should be preserved. We don't all want to live in Dublin or Limerick or Cork or Waterford or any of those cities. They're grand places, but we actually want to live in rural Ireland, and we want to have the same rights and means to make a living in rural Ireland.
Well,
I'll give you a statistic there. Sorry, Roisin, my apologies.
Go ahead, Patrick, go ahead.
Just to give a statistic there, when you're talking about the importance of agri-food in local areas, I went to the local supermarket in Castletownbere and I said, what will the impacts of Brexit be on you? And he said, very simply, Patrick, if we lose 20 boats, then that means we give €500 worth of shopping to those boats for their crews to go out on a trip, right? So 20 boats, 500 a week is €1 million by the end of the year that he lost from his tills. That is a massive blow to a business inside a small rural town. That's what you're talking about. And unfortunately, that happened to that man because we lost that many boats out of the harbour.
And that's jobs. That's part-time jobs. That's students as well, getting their travel money to get maybe to the university in Cork or something like. The trickle-down effect is massive.
Yeah. If you go down into Castletownbere now, it is very, very quiet. The once vibrant town that you've seen, driven by the enterprise that fishing was below there, is gone genuinely, and you'll see places closed and they'll open maybe a couple of days at the weekend or something like that. They're part-time. The shops are closed, there's very little activity down there, and people are noticing it.
You can't always pivot in all of these fishing villages. I don't want to say former fishing villages or towns, but you can't always pivot to the likes of tourism, and you're certainly not going to be getting in a Google or a Meta or, an Amazon to set up some kind of a depot, a collection centre.
Yeah, no, it's really important, and the same is happening to our farming community as well too. And look at Patrick said it himself, if the financial income is not there at the moment, and as you said now, there's a 20% cut in the help that's been given to farming communities. And this isn't free money, by the way, as I learned myself, and you did too, Cynthia. You said it yourself. Farmers are expected to do more, put up more fencing, farm off the land, do the streams, monitor, be environmentalists, that they weren't expected to do before. And then, as Patrick said, to cope with the increased production that you have to do to match the not such an increase in your products coming back to you, then you have to intensify more, which incurs more cost. And it's a never increasing bigger treadmill. And eventually what happens is the young people see what the likes of Patrick is doing. So he did say he had a full-time job. I'd love to know which one he's getting more hours into, and would he be in trouble with the WRC if they came down and said, come here, you're not paying yourself enough for the hours you're doing on the farm? Because I can guarantee you, knowing it myself, growing up in a small farm, there's plenty times you'll be told you'll be paid for that now when we sell the animal. That could be 12 months later.
Look, that's it, Patrick, in a nutshell. And I've been home farming part-time with Dad for the last, 4.5, 5 years, of which maybe last 3 years I've been kind of the main focal point from a decision-making perspective. And genuinely, I haven't drawn one penny out of the farm. Everything that I've done has gone back into it. I'm trying to shape it in a way that I would see as being, look, there was no point in saying otherwise. There was lots of improvements to be done, investments in stock, been doing all that and hoping in time that it will pay me back eventually. But Patrick, I'm lucky to have a job to sustain me.
But Patrick, nobody in any other business, whether they're selling cars or widgets into wadgets, or whether they're selling fitted kitchens, nobody would conduct their business in that manner, because nobody can be a happy fool going around selling or working or thinking that your working is getting you onto the profit line, when in actual fact it's not. And also, you can't just make ends meet. I mean, obviously, you're able to pay your bills, and that's wonderful. And you're able to pay back the bank or whatever, if you've got a bank loan or a credit union loan or anything. But that is, quite frankly, it's impractical. It's ridiculous. It's unrealistic. And the thing that sticks in my craw, I just want to go back to the defence. There's an awful lot of talk, as I said, in Europe about defence. There's an awful lot of talk about autonomy in defence and being autonomous. And now we know with Greenland and all the talk about Trump, and we see Iran and all of this unrest that's going on. And it's all about autonomy in defence. Well, hang on here. We need autonomy in food production. That's what we need. God bless us. If we're going to be dependent, I don't know, on China to feed us or on America to feed us, number one, we're going to be ill. We're going to get ill. And number two, we may have a similar situation that we experienced when the war broke out in Ukraine, whereby suddenly we were held to ransom in relation to our energy costs.
Look, it comes down to, you mentioned it earlier there, Cynthia, and I think Pat mentioned it as well. If you look at the surge in the beef price this year, up to an €8 kilo at its peak in the first half of the year, the reason it got to that price is because there was a shortage of beef across Europe as a whole and the world. And the reason there's a shortage of beef in the world is because there's been years and years and years of policies that have forced people out of beef production. Because everyone thought it was the right thing to do from an environmental perspective. And look, I sound like I hate the environment, but I don't. I genuinely think we all can work together here. But they've targeted the wrong areas to try and make their gains. And now, if you look at the last 3 months, and this hasn't really come up a lot because Mercosur has taken over the whole debate. Like, the beef prices dropped from €8 a kilo to €7 a kilo. So that's €300 per head on a typical carcass animal in the factory. So, like, that's a lot of money to be down on one animal. If you multiply that out at the prices people paid for cattle early last year, like, people are on for a potential big hit. And the reason the price was so good is because European countries were so short of beef. Exporters were flying in the marts. They were buying cattle all over the place, sending them all across Europe, wherever it may be, so I'm still envisaging Irish beef prices to withhold a decent spell over the next 2 years because so many cattle left the country in 2025 due to the shortage of beef across Europe and other parts of the world. And then Blue Tongue had a part to play in it. There's loads of market things that went in our favor last year, and they're kind of still there. But I know the factories are trying to suppress prices, and Mercosur is a problem is a bad deal for beef farmers. Maybe a bit better for dairy farmers because it might open up more markets.
Maybe.
But it's the beef side of things is going through a peak because there's less beef in the world.
Yes, but the other thing is, Patrick, though, beef is our speciality, or one of our specialities. We have a lot of successes in farming, but beef is one of them. And, that's another reason that this is worth fighting for as well, because it is going to adversely affect, it may be a small percentage, but I don't care how small it is, because of the fact that there are the other issues about the hypocrisy. I'm going to call it, different standards. I'm going to call it very, very poor standards. And we're being asked to upend basically what the fundamental basis of the European treaties, which are supposed to be based on fairness and equality and level playing field. And that's now just upended. And I understand politics, needs must. But at some point, no, needs doesn't must. We have to take a stand and we have to say no, enough is enough.
I'm going to come back to fishing, and I'm just going to give you a warning of what's coming with the farming, because it's endless. And that's the regulation, as you spoke to Patrick and you, Cynthia. So fishing boats, before they leave the port, they have to dial in to the control agency, and they get a 4-hour window of when they're allowed to leave, and they have to leave in that window. If they don't, they have to call back in and give a new estimated time that they're going to leave the port, and then wherever they go to, they have to log down where they are. And there's a computer on board their boat that before midnight, you have to fill in how much fish you caught during the day, where you caught it, how much fish are inside in the fish boxes, and where those fish boxes are actually positioned in your hold. Now, do you think that's fairly strenuous? That that's a good way of monitoring what you have inside your boat and where you caught it? Do you think that's fairly intensive?
I think I think that's intensive. I think it is.
Right. So I'm going to tell you what they've have to introduce this year in the new control plan. It's after every haul you have to do that. So if you shoot your gear 4 times in the day, you have to do all that work in 4 hours. But you might only get maybe 10 kilos of a species in a box. This is the over regulation that's happening, Cynthia. That's happening nowhere else. And this is what we've said. And back to the Mercosur, we had a 49-year agreement with the European Union in the Hague preferences. 49 years it was allowed to happen. Practice. and
Yeah.
custom and practice. And on the 50th year this year, they decided, no, we'll be losing too much fish, not because of anything Ireland did, but what the other coastal states did. Again, Norway, UK, Faroe Islands, and Iceland, by them taking more and collapsing the stock, they couldn't afford to lose more. So Ireland had to lose it. And we lost disproportionately because it's one of the stocks that we actually have a healthy share in. So when we lose more than everybody else. And that's what happened. So when you have that, as you said, Cynthia, and this is where we're going to be asking yourself and talking tomorrow, you're dead right. We have to go back to the values of what the European Union stand for. And it was the opposite. That's why you had the cap. After World War II, when people weren't producing food and Europe was going hungry, that's what they did. That's what the cap was brought in, was to incentivize agriculture and people getting into it to produce food. And we're moving away from that and thinking, well, we'll get it from Brazil or some other country instead, thinking because it's over there, we won't see the damage that is being done in their environment. And sure, what you don't see, what you don't hear, what you don't speak, hear no evil, see no evil, see no evil. This is what it seems to be going. But the people at home in Europe that carried the burden, just like Patrick has said, spending 3 or 4 years investing into a farm business from his father for nothing.
Yes.
You wouldn't make it up. It's slavery. And then to be told, no, we're going, thanks for doing that, just like the boys that bought their boats, change the rules just when you get there, and the rules then put you out of business. And they
That's
call that
exactly.
fair?
I just the overregulation and the red tape. I'm across a couple of files seeking to reduce red tape and regulations in business because, it didn't take Draghi and Letty, all those very important economists, to tell us how uncompetitive Europe is. You just have to come here for a day and breathe in the air in the European Parliament, and you'll see how uncompetitive it is. And one other, I'll give you an analogy, I suppose, or another little simple example in relation to transport. So I'm a member of the Transport Committee, and serving on a committee is like being in a government department, but you're not the minister, you're with an awful lot of other MEPs, and you're trying to basically consolidate files and reevaluate files and update files from a legislative point of view. But actually, Ryanair, I met with them today, as did a number of people in relation to the aviation industry. And so Europe started out very, very well. And I still do believe in Europe. I'm committed Europhile. But Ursula von der Leyen, for example, if we don't go back, decades, but if we just go back to her first mandate, she was very strong on the single market and was very good to Ireland in relation to Brexit and maintaining that single market. And on we come now to the new Parliament and the new mandate. And unfortunately, the red tape has just become overburdensome. In the airline industry, for example, we do aviation extremely well in Europe. It's very competitive. It's the most competitive market probably in the world. And the average ticket price, airfare price, which I learned today, courtesy of Ryanair, is approximately 45 euros in Europe. But in America, it's $115, which is approximately 100 euros. And that's because we have the single market, we have the open skies, we've got everything going very well, except in the middle of it all, we decide to overregulate on environmental taxes, also overregulate on aviation taxes, and then introduce the sustainable aviation fuel targets for the airline industry, and then add in the air traffic control system, which hasn't been revamped to ensure that the air traffic controllers in France won't close the entire skies in Europe at any given time. So there's a number of problems as a result of over-regulation. And what we need now is we need a robust commission and a robust leader and MEPs as well, myself included, who will actually say, no, this is wrong. We need to go back to the heady days. I mean, I'm old enough to remember Peter Sutherland when, and the previous commission that he was involved with, who said, no, we're going to open up the skies. We need open skies. We need a single market because Europe has to become competitive. And look what was created. A wonderful aviation industry in Europe, better than the East, better than America in the West and so forth. So we really need to go back to our fundamental principles here. And I know it's difficult. Politics is always difficult. And the Parliament at the moment is made up of a 1/3 of far right So there's a whole different complexion politically sitting there looking at us and looking at Ursula von der Leyen and putting the pressure on. But you know what happens, though, when you get that diversity? I think we need stronger leadership and we need a stronger commission. And that includes all the commissioners, including Ursula von der Leyen, not leading out solely and doing solo runs, which unfortunately we've seen her doing on a couple of occasions. In other instances, she's been very good. I'll give her credit. Her credit is due. But solo run on Israel, Gaza, solo run now on the Mercosur, to the extent that it's not displaying positive collaborative politics, which the EU should be engaging in. And we've seen the response in relation to Trump and the tariffs and the recent events since Christmas. We've seen, unfortunately, almost a timid response from Europe, from the likes of Kaja Kallas, the Commissioner for Foreign Affairs and so forth, and indeed other commissioners. And we had a very robust discussion in Renew Europe for about 2.5 hours this morning. And an awful lot of mainland Europe MEPs, if I could call them that. I'm talking about the French and the Germans and the Swedes. I mean, literally irate about Europe's weak stance now thus far with President Trump and asking for, a different approach.
I think, Cynthia, just to add to your point there, you've mentioned, the extremes now in Parliament on the right and the left, which were maybe hadn't been there in previous parliaments. And I think that has come from frustration on the ground with the voters of seeing so much burdensome red tape coming down in every industry, all walks of life, by over-regulating everything, no sense in anything anymore. And now, it gives the extreme views a chance to come in. And you see it in every part of the world at the minute. The extreme views seem to be taking over all the debates and starting to worm their way into, government positions, where there's leaders of countries, and it's not good for the world as a whole. And just examples of that from a farming perspective, and again, I'm sure fishing is probably the same, but no other, oh God, the word escaped me. But no other industry would probably accept what agriculture and farmers go through. So I would say we get 5 or 6 different types of payments a year, maybe. And I'd say if 2 of those arrive on time from Europe and the department, we're doing well. So they're up, they're late, they're delayed. The red tape that the department have to cross-check everything, make sure everything is in order, send out inspectors potentially for certain things. The whole thing is completely and utterly mad. And you ring the department to ask them, where is this payment? And they'll tell you, well, they had to do this and they had to do that. And in fairness to the poor people in the department on the phones, I don't know how to stay home, because their head must be wrecked every day with farmers wondering what's going on. And it's due to all the checks and balances that they have to do because of all the policies that have been created over years and years and years now at this stage. The whole thing is completely bureaucratically inept at this stage and just needs a complete and utter revamp. And, technology isn't being used, I think, in this scenario as well. There's so many things that could be done without the use of, people in some scenarios. And it's that could speed up a lot of these checks and balances that people are having to do on a daily basis.
I agree, Patrick. And I mean, even today it was stated, and I feel the same sentiment myself. I am unhappy about the speed with which that Ursula von der Leyen and her commission are actually invoking and creating and progressing the change that is required. We've had the big report from Draghi. We had it in September 2024. And prior to that, we had the Lette report from the other gentleman, the Italian, I believe he is. And I just, read the recommendations and the highlights of that as well. It's the same said thing. And yet we're still waiting. It's now 2026, folks. And we're still waiting to see this reclaiming our competitiveness. And for example, I'm only a little minnow, 1 out of 720 in the European Parliament, but I am so frustrated with expecting and looking to and anticipating that I will hear the next big move to reduce the red tape, to reduce the overburdens, and to get back to reality, Patrick, that you've spoken about, and I'm not seeing it. So look, I'm always a doer person. So I'm launching, for example, in my own little minnow way, I'm going to launch Freeing Up European Skies, my own little campaign about celebrating aviation and saying, listen, guys, can we now talk about investing properly in our airports and in our aviation industry so that we can get back our competitiveness? Because we all know that airports leads to increased business, not only just tourism business, but also business of every kind. And we need to stop penalising in certain aspects and we need to balance it obviously against the environmental goals, but we need to stop penalising an industry that is very successful and that we really need as an instrument of competition and competitiveness. And I didn't say that. That's not me saying it, little old me. I'm not an economist, but that is actually what Draghi said in his own report and what Ursula von der Leyen said we're going to invoke. We're going to make this happen.
And Cynthia, in July, Ireland takes on the presidency of the European Council. Is this something that Ireland could, take the ball with and run and, really make an impact on? And also, we spoke about the CAP and the regulations there. Patrick has spoke a lot about the common fisheries policy, how it's the whole concept of relative stability of coastal communities that's completely gone out the window. Are these things that Ireland in their presidency can take on and can do something really fundamental? Because we see Simon Harris talking about um banning about social media for underage and or people on social media,
Right.
having to, identify themselves. Yes, that is an issue. But when you talk about so many things around regulation and how our farmers are being treated, how our fishermen are being treated, there are so many things in Europe that Ireland could when they're in during this presidency, grasp.
Yes. And we are good politicians. I mean, we are good at doing our job, and we have a proud history of democracy in Ireland, and we do know how negotiations should be carried out and building up collaborations and so forth. Now, unfortunately, the question that you posed was, can Ireland lead out on certain things that are deeply concerning, not just to ourselves, but obviously to the whole of Europe? And the answer is no, because the files that are coming through the Parliament and through the Commission dictate what the Irish presidency will be about in the main, Paul. But we will be in a significant position of influence, the soft power, the soft politics. And that's where I would hope that our ministers, our government, and indeed me as an MEP, that I will be raising issues and hoping that it will fall on more open ears than it would have, because we weren't in the presidential role. So it is a role of influence. And I do know that the priorities and the files that will be focused on in accordance with the Commission workbook will be very much, Paul, the MFF, the Multi-Annual Financial Framework. Now, that may be good. I hope it will be for CAP, for example, because obviously the opening salvo was 20% less CAP budget for the farmers. Which was quite a shock. And there will be some other areas of influence. It may not be in the area of that you've just cited, social media, but notwithstanding that, I will be raising issues under social media because, again, it comes under IMCO. I'm one of many MEPs that's across the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act, which is directly connected with online and the misuse and the abuse, and in relation to everything we've seen recently about Grok and so forth, and X, which is completely toxic. So, look, the Irish presidency, the government will have to announce fairly soon what I'm going to call it their priorities, or what their table of work is going to be and their schedule of work. But it will be very much dictated by the Commission's files.
Okay. You're muted there, Roisin.
We're coming up to over the hour, but I know there's one question that Patrick Murphy really just wants to top on is our neutrality. Fishermen won't be allowed to fish in our Irish waters because of the submarines and the cables, and if there's a war on. So if we could just touch on that for a few moments, and then we can finish up then.
Yeah, so I'll just start you off. I had an uncle that worked in the Merchant Navy that didn't make it home because he was sunk by a submarine in World War II. So that's what I'm talking about. We already seen it with the ship that came from Venezuela, that it was being shadowed by a submarine, and yet it was boarded by another military power. And this is happening. This is not something that may happen. it's actually happening, and I'm constantly contacted both by vessels and by news agencies and everything else because of us chasing the Russians out of our EEZ. We didn't really chase them, to be honest. We negotiated with them, and they kindly withdrew. That's the genuine what happened there. But they just moved into international waters. Now, they did so because we did mention the cables at that time to the Russians, that where these activities were. So maybe they thought, well, if we stay here, then we'd be giving up the reasons why we're around. I don't know. That's looking into somebody else's mind. But you can be assured that if there's military operations going out, especially in the modern warfare that you have now, fishermen will be a soft target. And as you said yourself, Cynthia, food security, I think we're losing a trick here. I think it's madness because, again, coming back to and bringing Patrick into this, right? A cow isn't on the plate after a month or two. It's, minimum 18 months. And then you have to get the breeding stock. And Patrick said it himself, a lot of animals that normally wouldn't be sold out of the country have been sold. And it's going to take time to replenish those animals, and that leads to food security being jeopardized. In other words, we don't have enough. Luckily enough, we produce more food in our country than we consume in certain aspects, even though flour, we bring in 99% of it. So, these are the realities, and there needs to be an actual sit-down report to see where the weaknesses are, like anybody does in their businesses. But certainly for fishing, I wouldn't be sending lads out to go catching fish, especially when they mightn't have enough of it to make a decent profit out of it, to risk their lives. They did it during COVID, in fairness to the lads, because everybody thought you could fall over and be dead in a day or two. These fellas were 200 miles off. It wasn't as if, had access to medical care or a hospital, and it takes at least 24 hours just to steam in, So these guys and women risked their lives as they were understood when they went out during COVID. Genuinely, they didn't just go into a hospital and turn up for work. They left the pier for a week or two, and they were subject to this. And some people did get sick, but they did get helicoptered in. But if there was a massive outbreak, you just wouldn't have the facilities to bring them in. So it's just something that I touched on because a lot of people are raising it with me, Cynthia. And I actually was reading an email before I came on about this because there's an actual conference to be held, bringing all the parties together. And I've got an invite, would you believe it, that because of the talking to Russians and the interviews that I'm doing to speak on it. I'm no expert. But people don't realize is that these cables, you can find exactly where they are. They have to be identified where they're being laid. And there's another one coming in from America into Cork, around Ballycotton. So this is ongoing. We have cables being laid across the channels. Now, these are dangerous for our vessels as it is because we tow across the bottom. But definitely when it comes to neutrality, it is critical that Ireland retains its neutrality, because if we don't, we will become targets, and we will be a soft target. So I was just wondering, what your views on it now that we have you.
I might just add to that before you come in, Cynthia. I know you have the final word on that with your role. But just look, Ireland's neutrality, I'm a bit on the fence on it. Like, Patrick, your point is valid. I know there's stuff going on there that we're not probably aware of, and is going to cause, if there is a global war that breaks out, there's going to be a lot of people hanging around the Irish coast trying to cause damage to certain things that are going to affect their specific enemy. I think, there's a weird thought process in Ireland around our neutrality. In reality, we're not a neutral country. We're aligned with likes of America and Europe and the West, and the Western world, as we would call it. That is where we fit. That's where our morals and values lie, is where we're most associated from a common side of things. And there's other parts of the world that don't see that and see that as a threat and do want to kind of hamper that. Now, America obviously is in a very different place at the minute, and there's a lot of things going on that are, not what would be typically American over the years. But I think there's one element of it where Ireland has not invested in our armed forces correctly for generations, and we've left ourselves open to being very, very weak at even just the basic defence side of things from ourselves as a country. And none of our politicians should be against the idea of supporting the Irish armed forces in protecting the basics of our waters and our skies at a minimum. But when it comes to then what maybe some of our allies may be doing around our coastal waters and what that may cause issues for us down the tracks potentially if they get in the wrong space with some of their enemies is definitely something that we don't want to be involved in either. So look, I personally, again, right down the middle as usual. There's two sides to it, but we the word neutrality, it gets mixed up in a lot of different terms, and I think some political people in Ireland use it as this sworn thing that we can never change. We are not a neutral country in our viewpoint, and how we want to live our lives as Irish people is a certain way, and there's other parts of the world that don't meet that same moral compass and want to change it. And like, we have to be away, we can't shy away from that fact, and we're a small country. We're going to need support from others to help us along in some scenarios. But look, Cynthia, I'll leave you at the final word on that from your role.
Well, look, I'll try and be as succinct as possible. I think we are neutral. I deeply believe in our neutrality. I mean, we made a decision at the founding of our state that we were going to be neutral. And as a result, it freed up an awful lot of our GDP to invest into schools and housing and health and infrastructure and this, that and the other. And we are where we are now. So, but we are in a very, very insidious, dangerous position now. And we need to see much more cooperation with our fellow EU members on security and defence. Now, the Irish government, to their credit, and my party in particular, there has been a dramatic increase in spending. And of course, it didn't come about just by accident. Of course, the pressure was on since the war began. But I think in last year's budget, I just got the figure before I came online. In the budget last October, we had a record allocation of 1.49 billion in defence funding. And that was an increase of 11% year on year. That was a lot for us, which traditionally, as you quite rightly said, Patrick, had not invested adequately at all in our armed forces. Now, we are going to continue to ramp that up. But of course, we have the other spending priorities. We're back to the housing, we're back to the health. So I think from the point of view of our image in Europe, it's very important, folks, that our European neighbours see that we are carrying the can as well, insofar as we can. And we are not looked upon very favourably by our fellow Europeans in Europe, because they know about our vulnerabilities that Patrick has highlighted underneath the seas. And they know all about the shadow Russian fleets and so forth. And they know about the lack of investment. So I think very quickly, if we are going to curry friendship and continue to have our friendships in Europe, we're going to have to make sure that that investment does happen rapidly. But I think it's probably best placed, Patrick, this is where I disagree with you, Patrick O'Neill, I think it's best placed to be spending that in the context of neutrality. But we do have to undo the triple lock. We have to be able to show that we can send our armed forces in a peacekeeping mission to wherever they are required to go, because we have to play our part. We have to be seen to play our part. Otherwise, we will not have friends in Europe who will come to our aid if and when there is an attack, an invasion.
But in reality, and it's a fair point, but in reality, are we neutral when I know we're giving money to Ukraine, which in fairness, I know is shaped in a way that's for specific purposes, not directly at war, where American planes come through Ireland. Like, we're not really neutral. Like, we wouldn't let the Russians do that. At the end of the day, like, we're not specifically neutral. We have our alignment, and it is, but we don't go looking. We're not going starting wars. We're not going to put certain, we are aligned a certain way. And I think we have to be, when we say the word neutral, in reality, we're not, but we will support the human cause that come out of these wars from both sides as best we can, within reason. But I think the word neutral is a little bit extreme in some areas, because it doesn't actually necessarily affect my understanding of the word neutral. We are clearly on the Ukrainian side of that war in reality.
I think we have to do neutrality in our own inimitable Irish way. And I absolutely agree with you, Patrick, on the semantical examination of this word, because neutrality can mean an awful lot of different things, as we know, to an awful lot of different people, particularly politicians in Leinster House who are constantly arguing about it. But the one thing that I think people are clear about is that Ireland doesn't see a home for itself in NATO, for example, when we're never going to be. We couldn't even contemplate being some kind of a partner with NATO. But but we will, or sorry, when I say partner, in a member, but we will have to partner with NATO in terms of our participation in those ways that we can neutrally participate, that you have referred to, Patrick, which is in, we're not going to produce bombs and bullets, and we're not going to have forces out there killing people, but we are going to assist those that are wounded and maimed in wars in the way we have been doing it with Ukraine.
Well, as a Defence Force mommy, whose son is just back from the Lebanon with the 126. I'm delighted that we won't be sending, and I hope we won't be sending our sons to the front lines of war, but we stay in the peacekeeping role. And
I have to say, you must be very proud, Roisin. I had two uncles, one who served in the Congo. Can you imagine? That's going back a bit. And then my other uncle served in the Lebanon, and I went out to the Lebanon, and I was in Camp Shamrock, and I have to say, I'm just filled with pride for our forces.
Yeah, I'm as proud of him, and I always get and ask him. He pops in. I always ask him if I need a wee job done. I always ask him when he's wearing his uniform because he never says no.
I like it.
Yeah.
And he's just handsome in his uniform. I love him wearing his uniform. He just looks so handsome, and he wears the tricolour on his left arm, and I'm so proud of him.
Yes. And can I just say, you've triggered something in me now in the tricolour. I'm also going to start a little campaign to reclaim the tricolour. I'm calling it Bratach Glas Bán agus Ór, I'm calling it, because I'm sick of seeing the tricolours flying around the towns of Ireland's south in an attempt to portray or to convey this message that Ireland is full. It's unacceptable. So anyway, watch out for that little factus.
Well, I have a tricolour here, which the Defence Forces gave me when I met my son up at the airport when he flew home. And it sits on the desk here, and it'll go up into, I'm going to put it framed, and with his medals, and I'm going to get it framed. People were thinking I'm cracked, but it was just something very special when we went to collect them from the airport.
Yeah, because the tricolour is for all of us, you know? So why should it be captured or hijacked by whoever is hijacking it at the moment? We all know who it is, but that's a different programme, a different discussion. But it's absolutely unacceptable that our flag should be, treated in that manner. And I don't know, for people to see on lampposts in every town around Ireland, certainly in Ireland South anyway.
It's not something like our tricolour's been hijacked for a long, long time across many different areas. Like the tricolour, in fairness, the meaning of it is the complete opposite of what is always being portrayed at from my lifetime anyway, from different organisations. And so best luck to you, Cynthia, with it. But it's
I'd be asking you to fly the flag now.
The education around the flag. Yeah, the education on the flag needs to be front and center again, because it has been hijacked by organisations who are actually the complete opposite of what our flag actually means.
Exactly.
And, young people looking at it going, "This is normal," when in reality it's not.
Yeah.
Well, I grew up in Derry, and the flags and all the different colours, and I had two names. I had Roisin and Rhonda whenever I was stopped in different areas. So I really love our Irish flag, and it was something when I came down here, it was something I was very proud of, that I had an Irish flag, and that was my flag. So, but before we go, we talked about Defence Forces, and we talked about our fishermen and our farmers, and I think it'd be very apt to say, as we're talking about defence, to all our men and women serving and representing Ireland with such dignity, honour and integrity, thank you for your service.
Oh,
absolutely.
You're
here. And say a lot to your lad for me.
I will, Patrick. And I would like to say thank you to all the farmers and to our fishermen, because no food, we have no human beings, and it would take away all our humanity here.
And Cynthia, no pressure now to keep us there.
I like pressure.
You'll have nothing to talk to Patrick about tomorrow now, Cynthia. You're going to have all that pressure.
I like Patrick's pressure.
This is the warm-up. This is the warm-up.
Thank you, Paul, for being such a gentleman to allow the rest of us to speak so much.
That's it, yeah. Apologies, the two of you didn't get a word in, and it wasn't me tonight. It wasn't me.
It's not about us. It's not about us here at the Irish Political Roundup. It's not about us. It is about you, the guests, and your message and your conversations between one another and to the audience.
Thanks very much, Roisin, for having us on, Paul. And good to see you again, Patrick. And see you tomorrow, Cynthia.
You might come on with us again. It was an absolutely brilliant programme, one of the best Agri Foods we've had. So thank you so much indeed. Patrick O'Neill,
Gurv Mahagi, Iwa.